This is Devin with Writing Daily. Lots going on. This is the first time I'm checking in probably about 5 or 6 days, in part because, as many of you know, I had been setting up a audio narration for my book, 10,000 Miles. But we're good. Wait, let me back up. Writing Daily is for writers who are looking to get more accomplished with their work, write more stories, submit more often, and kind of know what's going on in the writer's life. My name is Devin. I am your host. I am also the editor-in-chief of In the Know Traveler, as well as the author of the forthcoming memoir, 10,000 Miles with My Dead Father's Ashes. And today we're going to be talking about audio narration. I'm actually sort of about 120 pages in on mine, and I was fortunate. By the way, welcome, Claire. It's good to have you here. As always, if you are new to joining us, feel free. You can always ask questions in the box here on Facebook Live, and I will do my very, very best to get to them. Comments are always appreciated, and whether you're seeing us live or not, you can always ask questions on Facebook or devingalladay.com or YouTube, and then of course you can find me really easily on places like iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play and all those kinds of fun things. So I am going to say right off the bat that before I was doing my narration, I was pretty nervous about the whole thing. I am a little bit dyslexic, but I have kind of worked pretty hard on reading. So I'm pretty good at it. I've spent an awful lot of time, so I should be at least marginally okay with it. But I still find myself sticking on words and things like that. And as you might imagine, that's not kind of the cool thing to do if you're doing your narration. But what I did want to say is it is doable. Like, without question, this is something that is working out and it's going well. And so I want to kind of pass along some of the tips that I have been given and that I've learned along the way in this very short amount of time. And so the first one is that I think when I had it in my mind that this would be a 16-hour day, that I would just be plowing through this book and just reading and going as fast as I could, is it's a terrible plan, and it's impossible, and no engineer, sound recordist is going to allow you to do that. So the time frame that I have going with my engineer is 4 or 5 hours, and what he would say is that after 4 or 5 hours is that your voice will start sounding more raggedy because it's just tired of the constant talking, because 4 or 5 hours of continuous talking, especially while you're reading, is challenging. So you can kind of expect that it's probably going to be shorter. And not only that, the actual sort of cognition of, kind of your hand-eye coordination kind of starts deteriorating. I found that after about 5 hours, I was making more mistakes. I was mispronouncing more words. I was having more challenges. So I think that's kind of the ceiling. He even said that real pros, people who do this for a living, are really only kind of like 5 or 6 hours, and even that sort of like a max side with the breaks and things like that. So here's something that I highly recommend that you do, and I think it's paying off, is that you practice. Make sure that you read your book out loud. Make sure that you start thinking about things like pacing. In other words, how you're going to engage the audience with your audible, with your words. And I think that's kind of an important thing. So if you have time, is to practice as much as possible. I spent about an hour or two a day reading my book out loud, just so I would get used to my voice and used to me reading my words aloud. And I think one of the important things that was important for me is to read difficult paragraphs. And I'm not talking about okay, so there's two things going on. Is that one, as a writer, I use a fair amount of alliteration, which becomes, when you're saying it out loud, a bit of a tongue twister. I am referring to that, but I'm also talking more specifically that when I say difficult paragraph or passages in my book, I'm talking about the more emotionally draining, more challenging things, like reading sort of the parts that I don't really want you to know. Sure, I wrote them, but for you to hear me say them is even kind of stranger. So I wanted to make sure that me reading those passages out loud were important, to have, sort of like to not have to read them cold or blindly. In some ways, like while I have read the final version of the book multiple times, I haven't said it out loud. I haven't moved my lips along with it. And saying it out audibly, I think, is important. More often, another thing to practice on is projecting. In other words, getting your words out there in sort of a forceful way that can be picked up by your microphone. I think it's important stuff. Another important tip to understand is that no matter how much you practice, you are going to make mistakes. And perhaps, if you're like me, quite a few of them. The good news is that I think a smart engineer will have a system of being able to make the corrections quickly and easily, even if you end up having to read a particular sentence or a passage multiple times. For the most part, I think I did a pretty good job, but it's more technically challenging than I gave it credit. Also, consciously relax. The more you are going to be taxing yourself emotionally, or taxing yourself by reading or making reading into a big deal, don't. Just chill. Keep and remind yourself constantly, like every time I could feel myself starting to rush or really trying to squeeze through a challenging sentence or something, again, with a lot of alliteration in it, I really had to sort of stop, bring myself down a couple notches, be willing to slow down how I was reading. All of those things kind of made a difference, to just sort of like, okay, I need to be conscious during this process, and I need to slow down rather than just trying to speed my way through. It doesn't make sense, and it's not pleasing for the listener either. So with that said, stop and breathe often, especially if you are finding yourself making mistakes while you're reading. Keep slowing down. And quite literally, what I would do is, when I was reading a challenging passage and I would go through like 4 mistakes, Allison, welcome. When I'd read it 3 or 4 times and I was making mistakes, I would quite literally just stop, breathe, take a sip of tea. Matter of fact, the engineer I'm working with recommended, and he had it, something called throat coat, which I think you can find at, I've had it before when I've gotten sick, and I kind of love it. It's tasty, and it actually does make your throat feel good. I also found, as a side note, that air conditioning dries out my throat, and so I found myself having to breathe, take more sips of tea. I thought regular tea breaks was sort of like a good thing. Just, like when I say tea breaks, I'm talking about like 3 or 4 quick sips to just kind of start over again. And finally, rest your voice wherever possible, because again, reading straight for 4 or 5 hours for almost consistently is going to tax you in ways that you were not expecting it. And not only that, the quality of your voice will change. And I heard that, like I could hear that in the recordings. So what do we have today? So we're talking about, if you're doing your own narration, you can expect to do 4 to 5 hour shifts. I highly recommend practicing in advance as much as possible. If nothing else, just to get used to hearing the sound of your own voice. Know in your heart that you will make mistakes no matter how prepared that you are. I don't think anybody gets to show up and just do it. As many mistakes as I made when I was asking the engineer about it, and he's like, no, really, man, everybody makes lots of mistakes. Just keep projecting, keep kind of sit your back tall, and really kind of project and emote your language. So do that while you are relaxing. Make sure that you are in a good space, that you're not carrying anything, and know that this is work. Stop and breathe often in between challenging sentences and phrases, especially if you start making mistakes. Drink tea. It really is something warm for your throat is kind of nice. Honey, lemon, hot water is also really good. And then finally, when you get to take a break, rest your voice, especially if you're going to be doing it several days in a row. As I said, I'm about 120 pages in. That's about 60 pages a day. It's actually, I think, a pretty good pace. And so I have about another 50 pages or so to go. And anyway, that's what we've got. I hope you're enjoying writing daily today, and I hope to see you guys again soon. And by the way, as always, please consider hitting the like button down here, share, let your friends know, and we're going to talk more about how to be better writers more often, do it right, get our stories out there, and live the writer's life. So anyway, that's what I've got for today. My name is Devin. Thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you guys again soon.